Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Waste 360's Unpacking Recycling with Charlotte. My name is Charlotte Dreisman, and I am really excited to talk to you all today about Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. And if it's not familiar to you, if you don't know that term, don't worry whatsoever. We are, as the series suggests, going to unpack it, talking about what it is, how it works, and everything you need to know about it. EPR is a topic that I think is so interesting and has only really surfaced recently as a policy that we've been exploring in the United States. It certainly hasn't trickled down to be as common of a topic talked about over the dinner table, similar to bottle bills. Bottle bills are similar policies that folks are really familiar with. We talked about it a little bit in some of our recent episodes about those deposit schemes where you might pay 5 cents, 10 cents or so when purchasing a beverage container, and you get it back when you bring it back. So that is a similar policy where manufacturers of materials, distributors of beverage containers are required to provide that recycling option for folks who are buying those products. Well, EPR is a bigger universe of options that basically provide the same opportunity to better support recycling options for items that are produced. And it's kind of the secret sauce of why Europe has such high recycling rates. EPR programs exist all over the world. It's not just in Europe, but when we think about, wow, Europe has such successful recycling systems, the reason why is typically because of EPR. So it's something that I think, we've not spent a lot of time talking about. Really recently, we've become much more focused on EPR. Now, about 10 or so states have tried to pass EPR programs. A couple have succeeded, which we'll talk more about as well. But suffice it to say, it is a really cool policy type that we should all be thinking about more and talking about more and trying to pass in more parts of the United States. And let's just dive on in. So what is extended producer responsibility, or EPR programs? Basically, they are programs that require the producers of an item to pay for its end-of-life management. For curbside programs, for recycling programs like we might have today in our, outside of our home or outside of our apartment building, typically that means packaging and printed paper. But EPR programs can exist for lots of different types of materials. And in the United States, we've made much better progress on all of those other types of materials, not so much on the curbside recyclables, that really big piece of the puzzle. But we do have EPR programs that exist for items like electronics and paint and mattresses, tires, carpets, textiles, medical sharps. The list goes on and on. There are a lot of materials that we've instituted EPR programs for, where a paint manufacturer has to provide recycling options for paint for people to use. Or a carpet manufacturer might have to fund carpet recycling programs for businesses and people to have the opportunity to recycle the carpet after it's been used for. So it's something that a lot of states and cities are familiar with for other contexts, but it's a bit foreign for folks when it comes to curbside recycling. And it's a little bit, it's kind of at different scales. So when you think about a paint manufacturer providing paint recycling opportunities, that typically might be, a paint store is required to accept back paint, and they'll kind of send it back to their distribution and recycle it and reuse it into their processes. It's a little bit more contained. It fits a little better into a lot of the ongoing operations that they might have. When we talk about EPR for packaging and printed paper, though, we're talking about a much bigger system. So curbside recycling takes tons of trucks, lots of labor, lots of outreach and education, and it's an expensive thing. It's typically much more costly for a city to manage than trash. Typically, we kind of use the rule of thumb of buy two. So if, trash costs $70 a ton to manage, recycling might cost $140 a ton to manage. It's usually that much more expensive for cities, for communities to operate recycling programs for. So EPR would require a producer of packaging or of paper to pay for the recycling system that People has to collect all of those items. So that might mean in DC, for instance, that we have about 100,000 households with blue bins. We have a lot more multifamily households, but it might require producers who sell packaging of any kind in the district to pay for the recycling program and the collection of recyclables from all the blue bins that folks have. So EPR can be just that financial piece. It can be just producers cutting a check to cities or states and paying for recycling and the collection of recyclables. Or it can be a requirement for manufacturers to actually physically do the collection and manage the physical collection of recyclables. So for EPR programs that exist today, it might be a couple good examples are Belgium and Germany. So Belgium and Germany have the highest recycling rates of any country that exists. They have 81 and 83% recycling rates. It is super high. They are incredible recyclers. And one of the reasons why, the biggest reason why, is that they have EPR programs where producers of packaging in their country are required to have full 100% cost responsibility for the programs. And in some instances, they're required to physically manage and collect all the recycling as well. So in Germany, for instance, they have 100% cost coverage responsibility. All the producers of packaging and paper in Germany have to pay for the recycling. And they also have to get together and they start a third party who manages the actual collection and recycling of products that go into recycling bins. In Belgium, it's a little different. So they have 100% cost coverage as well, but producers only have to do that physical operational management for single family homes. For businesses and commercial entities and institutions, they just have to pay for it, but they don't have to be the ones who are organizing the collection of those recyclables. So it can be a little bit different depending on where you are. And every EPR program looks a little bit different. They're kind of like each like their own special snowflake, but it's really something that's exponentially increased over time. Germany was the very first country to start an EPR program in the early 1990s. And since then it's exploded. By the early 2000s, most of Europe had EPR programs as well as Taiwan. And then since then, it's really gotten so much more popular and has been a really important catalyst for a lot of countries to start their very first recycling programs. If they weren't a country that offered a lot of robust recycling programs to begin with, EPR has been a way that they've been able to fund those efforts and make those efforts happen. So now we see EPR programs across most of Europe, much of Asia, ranging from Cameroon and South Africa to Chile and Brazil and Ukraine and 5 Canadian provinces. And as I mentioned, a number of places in the US have tried to pass EPR legislation, but have yet to be successful until this past year when we've been really excited to see Oregon and Maine passing their very first EPR programs. So we're excited to see how those shake out. But let's talk a little bit more about how companies comply with EPR program requirements and kind of what the nuances of those programs look like. So EPR programs, we know, can be either that financial management, they have to pay for the EPR program, or it can be that kind of physical, actual collection of recyclables. And they do that by creating a third-party entity to facilitate. So it's typically called a producer responsibility organization or a PRO. And in some places, you have one PRO that you join. You join a single universal producer responsibility organization. All the producers get together and they pay into a system. And then that third party cuts a check to the government for whatever it costs to recycle the packaging that they're creating. For the places that they have that physical responsibility for recyclables, that third party entity would hire a hauler or hire a lot of haulers, and they would go out and provide the actual physical collection services. So not only are they paying for or actually managing the collection of recycling, but they often are responsible then to do a lot of the outreach and education that's required to ensure people are recycling right. So we want to make sure that not only are people putting the good things into a recycling bin, what they can put into the recycling bin, but also keeping out what's contamination and what can't go in. So a lot of EPR programs will require that producers spend a certain amount of money on education and outreach, or a certain percent of the total money that they're spending to pay for the recycling system on education and outreach. A couple kind of funky things that some folks have done with EPR programs is to add on a couple of additional responsibilities. So in Belgium, for instance, in their EPR program, not only are producers required to pay for and manage the recyclables that a household produces, but producers are also responsible for paying a €0.5 fee for each resident in Belgium to do anti-litter education. So the scope of EPR programs is really recyclables, but a couple programs, and it's exciting to think about how we can also support some of these adjacent things like litter Also, a couple EPR programs go a little bit above and beyond and not only deal with the recyclables that are put into a recycling bin, but also the portion of recyclables that are left in the trash bin that shouldn't be there. So it's a way of incentivizing producers to make sure not only are they communicating to consumers what they should be putting into the blue bin, but also really making sure on the back end that no recyclables are remaining in a trash bin. And the other way that EPR programs really leverage those incentives is through fees and recycling targets. So every EPR system will have a target for how good of a recycling rate they want to reach. In much of Europe today, it's 55%. So most countries have at least a 55% target for recycling. Many have higher ones, but that's kind of the floor, the baseline that the European Union sets. And 21 member states of the EU have met or exceeded that recycling target. And one of the reasons that those EPR programs have been so successful in reaching those very high levels of recycling rates is because producers that fail to make that recycling rate happen, that they fail to do enough education and outreach and design packaging that is recyclable enough to be recycled, they get a fee per ton that they fail to meet that recycling target. So let's say that we generate 100 million pounds of recyclables every year, and we have a 50% recycling rate. If we fail to meet that 50% threshold and we don't collect 50 million recyclables, if we only get 40 million recyclables, we have 10 million missing. What I'm going to have to pay is the industry 10 million tons, times $100. That might be my fee. If the fee is $100 penalty per ton that you miss the recycling target, that might be the cost you have to pay if you fail to facilitate that recycling target. And some of those penalties can be pretty onerous. A lot of systems have pretty mild penalties. Maybe it's just 20 euros or 30 euros or the equivalent amount of rubles, but a lot of programs have really onerous penalties. So it makes producers put a lot of effort and time and energy into making sure recycling happens because the financial consequences of failing to meet that recycling target are really meaningful. So that's one interesting way that EPR systems are set up to help facilitate those high recycling rates, which we've really not yet achieved in the United States. Very few areas have been able to achieve recycling rates that anywhere compare to that level. So, you might see certain cities hitting recycling rates that high in the West Coast, especially. We've seen a lot of success with recycling rates for cities, bigger cities. But as a whole, the US has been really stagnant at a 34% recycling rate for quite some time. So this could be a really helpful policy to help hit a recycling target that's more aggressive and more representative of the amount of recyclables we're generating, because everything we're generating that's recyclable, we really want to make sure it gets into a blue bin. But what about the packaging that's being designed that's not recyclable? So EPR programs address this too. So when producers all get together and join this third-party entity that either pays for or actually manages recycling, how do they pay? How much is each party responsible for paying into? Well, it depends on what packaging you're producing. So EPR programs have an admittedly pretty complicated set of calculations that they use to do this. But what you pay is based on a few important characteristics. So it depends on the material of the packaging that you're generating, how recyclable it is, and often some other characteristics like whether you're using bio-based materials, whether you're using recycling labeling, whether you're using recycled content. So based on all of those factors, they do the calculation and come up with a number that you owe based on the amount of material you're generating. And different types of those characteristics are pegged to different numbers. So for instance, a really recyclable high value paper item will cost you less than an unrecyclable plastic item or an unrecyclable item that uses mixed materials. So this way, the EPR system can guide producers of materials to produce higher quality, more recyclable items. Because they're getting penalized, they have to pay more if they're producing items that aren't recyclable or are low quality. So EPR programs are really effective to guide what kind of packaging is being produced and put into the marketplace. And increasingly, EPR programs are adopting these strategies, and we call them fee modulation or eco-modulation. So the fee being set depending on how sustainable the packaging is that you're producing. And a lot of the EPR programs that have now existed for 30 some odd years in Europe are just starting to factor in eco-modulated fees. Some of the new EPR programs that are being designed, like those in Maine and Oregon, which we're really excited to see start in the US, are going to be fresh out the gate with eco-modulation as part of their system. So it's something that we're really excited to see develop over the existing EPR programs that are around, as well as the programs that might be new and coming online soon. Another question that's really important to consider when we're talking about EPR programs is the cost to consumer. So we know it's going to be a good thing for higher recycling rates to be achieved, for better, higher quality recyclables to be collected, but just how much is that going to increase my jug of milk or my bottle of water that I'm buying? Well, looking at the EPR programs that have existed for some time, we can take a look and see kind of what's on the high end and what's on the low end, and where might new EPR programs like those we're seeing in the United States fall. Well, the most expensive EPR program out there is Germany's, and they're really successful. So we know they have a very high recycling rate, so they're paying a lot of money for their system, but it's also working really well. And for an item like a PET bottle, a soda bottle that's high quality plastic, that typically sees about a 3 or 4 cent increase in the product price due to EPR. And that's basically the maximum, the highest amount you're going to see. They have the most expensive EPR program out there. Of course, we know it varies a bit because, every system has their own set of financial calculations. And they also, of course, have those different eco-modulations that give you penalties or rewards for designing more sustainable packaging and using more sustainable materials. But 3 or 4 cents is kind of the maximum that we've seen. And we see it a lot lower in a lot of other places. So in somewhere like Ontario, we only see about a half a cent increase in the cost of something like a soda bottle when you go to purchase it at the point of sale. But in addition, a lot of EPR programs don't exist in a vacuum. So it's important to not only think about the EPR program that's being designed that requires producers to pay for and better manage and provide outreach and education for the packaging that they're producing, but that they also have a lot of supporting policies. So that might look like something like a landfill ban or a landfill tax to really disincentivize people putting trash into a trash bin and going to a landfill or a waste to energy facility. It also might look like something like an advanced disposal fee, and that's a bit of technical jargon just for a 1 cent or 2 cent tax that's put on a package at the point of sale to fund recycling efforts or litter efforts as a whole, kind of in addition to the costs of an EPR program. So a lot of times we see that EPR programs are really successful. They're big catalysts to higher recycling rates, but they aren't the only policy and program that we should be thinking about when we're trying to design the best environment for recyclables to be recovered. So when we think about how that's been going in the United States, it's really exciting to see recent movement in a couple of states after 10 or 12 have gone ahead and drafted extended producer responsibility legislation and haven't yet passed it. We were in a bit of a cycle over 3, 4, or 5 years of folks putting legislation out there, and it hadn't quite gotten the support to be passed, which is understandable because a lot of folks don't want to have to pay all of this extra cost to manage recycling when the costs used to be on citizens and consumers. But we've seen those types of legislation being crafted and passed in Rhode Island, Connecticut. It almost passed in California last year, Washington, Vermont, Massachusetts, and of course Maine and Oregon that were successful in passing the very first 2 extended producer responsibility legislation that we've seen in the United States. It doesn't always have to happen at a state level, though. Cities can certainly pass EPR programs as well. New York City has really been the first city to go ahead and explore that, which has been really exciting to see and something that I hope to see lots of cities pursuing as well. But something that we're really keen to keep an eye on, and I'm sure that we can dig into more once we see how those Maine and Oregon EPR programs are being crafted and see what the scope of them are. Do they include residential and commercial? Do they include, all of the packaging that can currently be collected in their blue bins, or just a subset of them? A lot of those details are being formalized and finalized right now. So really eager to unpack them in a new episode, I'm sure sometime soon. But I hope that was a helpful download on the basics of EPR, what EPR programs are, where they exist right now, and what benefits they give to communities where they exist. And I think that it's something that, we're all really excited to see kind of take hold in the United States and hopefully be a way that we can really kind of, we've been kind of at a 34% standstill with our recycling rate for so long now that, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So taking this policy that's been so key and instrumental for the best recycling, countries out there to be successful and applying it here at home is really exciting to see, and will be, I'm sure, a good experiment to witness the outcomes of soon. So thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Waste 360's Unpacking Recycling with Charlotte. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any and all questions. There is so much more to unpack with extended producer responsibility. It is a complex, thorny, complicated topic, and we just scratched the surface today. So feel free to send any questions, comments along. I'm eager to hear what you think, and really excited to dive into for future episodes. You can, of course, comment directly under this video on Waste 360's website. You can also shoot me a tweet at Chardreizen on Twitter, CHARDREIZEN, or at Char Recycles on Instagram. Thanks so much.